Greetings, friends. You know, there are some people in life who can be called supports. Without them, it's like having no walls in the house. You can stand still, but it's scary and not very reliable. Stanislav was such a person in my life. Some might call him a friend, others might say a brother. But for me, he was almost a saint. Stanislav not only helped me out in difficult moments, he became a part of my life. Do you know who he was important to me? My wife, Magdalena. She knew him as long as I did. Together we were a team, as in that saying, one for all and all for one. At least I thought so. There were days when Stanislav was the one who helped me to resolve difficult situations. He helped me out at work, supported me when I felt broken, and was my best man at my wedding. Imagine this, a man who stood next to you when you say words of love to your woman, promise her loyalty and support. He saw our best moments, our hugs and vows, and I thought he was happy for us. Do you know what happens? When you blindly trust someone, especially someone who has been with you in the best and worst moments? Well, I was that naive fool who did not see what was happening under his nose. And what about my wife, my dear Magdalena? We had been together for years, and I sincerely believed that she was the one with whom I would spend my life. How many times did we talk about our dreams and plans? When our first child was born, we were both over the moon. When our second child was born, I was even more convinced that I had made the right choice. All my dreams of a family were with her, with Magdalena. She knew me better than I knew myself. And here, you won't believe it, she was part of the trust that I gave to both of them, her and Stanislav, without hesitation. Is it possible to be that blind? Yes, it is possible. It's funny to think back, but I was constantly turning a blind eye to little things that now seem obvious. Imagine, they could talk for hours about music, work, travel, and I was not such an interesting conversationalist. Oh, how I laughed at that. I thought that my wife was just sincere and open, and my friend, well, he was always there when you needed him. And here I sit, listening to their conversations and thinking, what a lucky husband and friend I am to have such people. You know, at that time I didn't even realize that something could be wrong. It was later that I thought, Jan, you are even more naive than a child. Now I even want to pinch myself for the stupidity with which I trusted him. But no, I brushed these thoughts aside, thinking that they were nothing, because who could be closer than my wife and friend? But, you know, fate likes to throw surprises. I experienced one of these surprises about a month before all this mess started to brew. It was quite by accident when I returned home earlier than they expected. Stanislav was whispering something to Magdalena, and she was standing next to him, looking at him in a way I don't even remember her looking at me. At first, I thought it was some kind of misunderstanding, because I am me, and who else but me should know that my wife is devoted to me. But this something remained in my head. And I decided not to rush to conclusions, but just to observe. Imagine how hard it is to be silent and keep everything inside, while trying to pretend that you don't notice anything. Sometimes I just wanted to drop everything and ask directly, Magdalena, what are these miracles? But I decided otherwise. I had a plan B in my head. If they think I'm just a naive fool who doesn't see anything, then let them think so. Meanwhile, I will start playing my game. To tell you the truth, it was the hardest month of my life. Every time I saw them exchange meaningful glances or when she looked away from him too quickly, I felt a wave of contempt and anger wash over me. But, like that strategist, I restrained myself, thinking about the ending that was sure to come. And you know, the more I watched, the more I was convinced that my intuition was right. One day, on the eve of an important celebration, they had a little too much to drink, and then I seized the moment to ask Stanislav questions. Everything was under the guise of a friendly conversation, nothing special, just a conversation between friends. And then he decided to help me with his wisdom and started talking about his youth and how we all make mistakes. You know, I was sitting there listening to this with a look on my face as if nothing had happened. I kept quiet and nodded, but a plan began to emerge in my head. because I knew that staying silent was not an option. The first step is to get confirmation, and if everything is as I think it is, then they will see what it means to betray January. But for now, I stayed calm, enjoying their confidence that I didn't suspect anything. They thought I was a naive simpleton who was turning a blind eye. Oh, how wrong they were. And so, friends, do you know what it's like to sit on a powder keg that's about to explode, but try to keep everything under control? I just wanted to know how far they were willing to go. You know, it's interesting how you can live for years in your city, in your world, and then suddenly everything turns upside down. My hometown is Krakow. It's where I grew up, where I met Magdalena, where I lived and made plans. And now every corner reminded me of the same trinity, me, my wife, and my best friend. All those places where we spent time together, had lunch, laughed. All of this reminded me, as if laughing at me, look, Jan, you really were naive. Do you remember how I said I was collecting evidence? Well, this time I went further. I started to take on the role of a kind of private detective. My job was to see how far Magdalena and Stanislav had gone. And, my friends, what I saw made me wonder if I had been a fool all my life. One evening I told Magdalena that I would stay at work late. It was, of course, a pretext. In fact, I was right next door, in the same neighborhood, a couple of minutes from our house. It's strange, but watching what's happening in your own life as if it were a TV series is a kind of nerve-wracking experience. You sit in the car, grip the steering wheel, look at the same windows that your children used to look out of, and imagine that there is a betrayal going on behind the wall. That evening, I saw Stanislav come to us. I thought, what's the big deal? A friend could come to our house because we had always been like family. But this time there was something different. He knocked, and Magdalena opened the door as quickly as if she had been waiting for him all day. She stood on the threshold in the same dress that I remember her wearing only on special occasions. She never wore it for nothing. I was sitting in my car, looking at it, and a kind of carnival of contempt and pain began in my heart. I wanted to jump out, make a scandal, break the dishes, or better yet, Stanislav. But I kept myself in check. I'll tell you honestly, despair and disappointment are things that can turn even the nicest man into a predator. And although I have never considered myself particularly evil, at that moment I wanted to pay them both back. I saw them hugging in my own home, where I used to feel like the happiest man in the world, and I thought it was all just crazy. But here, friends, is where the fun begins. I decided not to throw myself into the deep end. No, I didn't. I decided to go around the situation carefully and prudently. Because, you know, there is a saying, revenge is a dish served cold. And so my patience came to an end. I was not going to close my eyes anymore. I started to develop my own plan. The next day, I specially organized a meeting with Stanislav. Just imagine, me, him and our shared memories at every step. We chose a coffee shop near Wawel, an old place where we always discussed everything. And every time he spoke, I caught myself thinking how good he was at pretending. Here he was, sitting in front of me, smiling, telling me about the difficult moments at work as if nothing had happened. So I decided to give him some rope so that he could hang himself with it. I'm sitting there drinking my coffee and I say to him, "Listen, Stan, have you noticed that Magdalena has been distant lately? I don't even know how to explain it, but it's like something has changed. She's been coming home late, making up stories about work. Don't you think she's seeing someone else?" He twitched for a second, but quickly composed himself and continued, "Jan, don't be silly. You know how busy she is. She's always working herself to death, that's all. Don't get your hopes up, buddy. You know how much she cares about you." Imagine this, he's talking about me and my wife so calmly, as if I've lost my mind and he's the only sane one in this company. At that moment I felt something like a cold shower. It was like realizing that everything in my life is a theater. And Stanislav is not a friend, but the main actor. I sat and listened to his stories about our beautiful life and realized that my calm, carefree existence was over. Because now I could no longer just wait. The next day I decided to do a little investigation. I felt like a detective in my own life. And the most interesting thing is that I didn't even have to work very hard. She herself gave me the key to the whole situation. One day, when Magdalena left her phone at home, I found a message on it. Yes, I opened her phone then, because I couldn't hold back any longer. And what did I see? Messages from Stanislav. And although they were not overtly romantic, the tone of their conversation. What can I say? If I had to prove my case in court, these messages would be a good clue. Short phrases, hints, joint plans. They didn't write directly that there was something between them, but anyone who saw it would realize that they were not just friends. And you know what's the worst part? Not the fact that she betrayed me. No. It's the fact that she did it with someone I trusted more than myself. So there I was, standing in the middle of the room, phone in hand, and I felt as if I had woken up from a bad dream, but everything around me was real. At that moment, a plan was finally formed in my head. I wasn't going to drop my things and run away from home. No. My plan was much better. I was going to make them experience the bitterness of what it means to lose trust and respect. I thought, let them think they're still in control, but in reality, I'm just going to watch their lives change when they realize they're on their own. And the first thing I did was, nothing. I just continued to live my life. I went back to my business, to work, to my usual routes. They thought I didn't know, and that was my advantage. Because, friends, what can be sweeter than seeing your close people think they've won, when in fact they don't even realize that it's me who's running the game? You know, there's a place in Krakow that I've always loved, Plata Park, right next to the old town. I used to walk there often, admiring the architecture and remembering the old days. And now, just imagine, I'm there again. But this time I come there with a different idea. I stand there, look at these trees, at the quiet river and think, how did this happen? Was it possible to see the signs before? Or did I, like a blind kitten, believe that friendship and love are something eternal? But now it didn't matter. Because I decided that life goes on, and my mission was to show that Jan was not as simple as everyone thought. The next step was to continue playing the game of indifference. So, the next morning I woke up with a clear understanding of my plan. I won't say that my strategy was flawless, but I aimed to make sure that every step towards my revenge was so invisible that neither Magdalena nor Stanislav suspected anything. Imagine, the two closest people in your life quietly continue their intrigues because they think that you are still the same naive Jan who would turn a blind eye to any meanness. To keep the situation under control, I decided to start small, to rip off their masks. How to do it? First, I began to investigate their habits more deeply, like a detective trying to put together a puzzle. It turned out that many of the things I thought were mere coincidences or chance encounters were actually carefully planned. For example, as soon as I started to work late, Magdalena suddenly started signing up for yoga or meetings with friends, and often in the same places as Stanislav. Interesting, isn't it? Coincidences are coincidences, but I made a note of it. Of course, they didn't know that I was guessing about everything. They lived their normal lives, and I continued to collect evidence. What helped me the most was that I started talking to some of our mutual acquaintances, who, as it turned out, knew more about certain things than I could have imagined. It turned out that my best friend had long been known for his adventures on the side, and many even tried to hint at it. But, as it happens, everyone was afraid to offend me, thinking it was none of their business. And only now, when I started to reveal the true picture of what was happening, it became clear that they had long suspected this intrigue. Perhaps they thought it was just another whim of Stanislav's that would pass quickly. But it wasn't. The next time we met again, I decided to be more active. My next mission was to undermine their trust in each other, so that each of them would start to doubt the other. I decided to plant some accidental information on Magdalena that Stanislav was not always honest with her. There was one time when we were celebrating a birthday at a mutual friend's house. I pretended to overhear a conversation between Stanislav and another woman, and there were spicy details in the conversation between them that hinted at something more than just friendship. Of course, I didn't say anything directly to Magdalena. But this hint was enough to make her interested and start looking at Stanislav more closely. That's how I gradually began to expose their weaknesses. A few days later, I saw Magdalena getting a little nervous during their meetings. She seemed to try not to show it, but there was fear in her eyes. It seemed that she was no longer very happy to be in this situation. Meanwhile, I continued to watch calmly. Another interesting moment was when I suddenly refused to participate in joint evenings with them. I used to always agree, because we had a tradition of meeting in the evenings at the nearest pub near the main market, where we would discuss business, work, and leisure. And then one day I just said that I was no longer interested. It was a real shock for them, because I was always the first to support our evening meetings. The next step was to socialize even more with other friends and acquaintances. My new image of a lonely man who seemed to be experiencing some difficulties in his marriage quickly spread among my friends. Rumors, of course, spread quickly, as they often do in small cities like our Krakow. Neighbors, friends, everyone began to suspect something, but no one knew for sure what was going on. I just kept the curiosity alive, but didn't give any details. To add to the intrigue, I started hinting to Stanislav that my marriage might not be as strong as everyone thought. One day we were sitting in the same bar near the market, and I decided to tell him, "Listen, Stan, have you ever thought that marriages might not be such an unbreakable thing? To be honest, I don't think Magdalena and I are the same anymore. You know what I mean, right?" He was immediately interested, and I saw a subtle spark of pleasure in his eyes. He had no idea that I was playing my own game, making him think I was tired of my marriage. I knew that as soon as he believed I was ready to break up, he would act even bolder, because he would think I wouldn't pay attention to him. And then I made a move that was the beginning of a real shock for both of them. I decided to tell Magdalena that I had been offered another job in another city. There was indeed a job, but I used it only as part of my game. It was just an offer from a former colleague who worked in Wrocław. And although I didn't plan to accept the offer, I told Magdalena that I was seriously considering moving. Her reaction was quite predictable. She pretended to be happy for me, but I could see anxiety in her eyes. She didn't seem to like the idea of me leaving. After all, then she and Stanislav would have to be more careful, because without me, everything would be too obvious to others. She even tried to convince me that it would be unnecessary stress for us, that moving is always difficult for a family. I listened to her arguments calmly, but inside I was pleased to see her fear of losing control of the situation. And then, when I was about to finally decide what to do next, something happened that I could not have predicted. One of our friends accidentally told me a story about Stanislav that I hadn't known before. It turns out that a few years before this incident, Stanislav had had an affair with a married woman, and then managed to hush up the scandal by pretending it was just a harmless flirtation. This information was the key for me to realize that he was not the friend I had known all my life. But what was worse, I now realized that this story was repeating itself, and this time I was the victim. You see, it was as if I had finally seen Stanislav's true face. I didn't feel sorry for him, as I often do after discovering a betrayal. I felt only a calm determination to see this matter through. And then I decided to act faster than they could have expected. My next move was a real test for Magdalena. I decided to suddenly go on a business trip that was actually a fake. I told her that I was going away for a few days and that I would have the opportunity to be alone, to think about our relationship. I was waiting for her reaction to see how she would behave. To be honest, I didn't care if she would miss me or not, I just wanted her to catch herself thinking that I was not around, and therefore nothing was interfering with her plans with Stanislav. And so, imagine this, I left her for a few days and quietly returned at night, without warning. As you may have guessed, I was not greeted with joyful hugs, but a completely different sight. I returned that night unannounced. All this time, I was sustained only by the thought of how everything would collapse before their eyes when they realized that I knew the truth. I don't know if it was the adrenaline or the thirst for justice, but I felt extremely calm as I approached my own house. The usual silence was around me, only the barely audible noise of the old maple trees outside reminded me that I was home. As I approached the door, I stopped for a moment. I imagined them probably sitting comfortably in my own home, thinking that I was somewhere far away, enjoying the peace. This was the moment when my patience began to pay off. I slowly opened the door as if I were about to enter my own home for the first time. Hearing the laughter from the living room, I realized that they did not feel any anxiety. In fact, it was almost like they were mocking my trusting attitude toward them. And now, just imagine, I'm standing on the threshold of my living room, listening to their carefree laughter, while anger and cold calculation simultaneously raged inside me. How long had I been covering for them, how much trust had I given them, and how had they repaid me? Under my own roof, in my own home. I felt like an outsider, but this only strengthened my desire to see it through. As I took a step forward, I heard their voices fade away. They probably didn't know I was back yet, but when they heard my footsteps, they were scared. And there I was, standing in the living room doorway, with my wife and my friend, who always claimed that I was like a brother to him. Can you imagine the expressions on their faces at that moment? They sat on the couch like two students caught in a crime scene and realized that they could no longer hide behind their lies. "What are you guys doing here, huh?" I said, not even trying to contain my sarcasm. I looked at them, and they looked at me as if they had seen a ghost. Magdalena tried to say something, but she failed, and Stanislav just lowered his head. My presence was like a thunderbolt for them. And this moment, friends, I savored as much as possible. Because in this situation, nothing else mattered. Neither their excuses, nor their tears. They got exactly what they deserved. I decided not to make a scandal. On the contrary, I kept a cold calculation, because I realized that the best revenge would not be screams and tears, but something much deeper, my indifference. And how strange it was to see them trying to talk me out of it, Magdalena crying, and Stanislav pretending that it was all a big mistake. But I knew that I no longer had the slightest trust in them. When they started to give their excuses, I just stood there and looked at them, keeping the same indifferent smile. Do you know what's most interesting? They were both so scared that they were ready to make up any incredible story just to make me believe. And at the very moment when Magdalena was about to fall to her knees, trying to explain how much she loves me, I stopped her with one short gesture. "You're both pathetic," I said, looking at them with contempt. "I had better expectations for both of you. But you know what's funny? I'm glad now that I saw your true nature." And with that, I turned and went upstairs, leaving them alone. At that moment, I felt incredibly free. I won't say it was easy. No, it wasn't. But I knew that I had started a new chapter in my life. And this chapter would be without them both. The next day I packed my things, leaving everything that reminded me of our life together. Every detail, every little thing that was a part of my memories with Magdalena, only made me feel disgusted. And although it was hard, I decided to leave everything behind. I was moving to another city. It was a city where few people knew me. Wrocław. I knew that I could start everything from scratch there. A new life, a new job, new people. And you know what was the most interesting thing? I didn't even feel any pain from the loss. Only incredible relief. At the new place, I started to build my life without unnecessary emotions. I got a new job and started to play sports. I liked that nothing connected me to my past. Time passed and I started to forget everything that had happened. But the most interesting thing is that my life has become much better. Without the constant burden of lies and betrayal, I felt that I was now capable of doing anything I wanted. Several years have passed. I succeeded in my work, built a strong circle of new friends who really appreciated me for who I am. And then, just imagine, one day I ran into an old friend from Krakow. He told me what was happening with Magdalena and Stanislav. Do you know what was funny? They hadn't lived together even a year after I left. Magdalena, as it turned out, could not find the happiness she was looking for. And Stanislav again turned out to be the same mean guy he had always been. After my departure, he betrayed her the same way he betrayed me. And now they were both left alone, without family, without friends. I even felt a little funny, a kind of ironic outcome of this whole story. But do you know the most important thing I learned from all this? That life is the best judge. And I don't regret for a second that I left everything in the past. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is just to move on, leaving those who betrayed you in their own swamp. And now I look at my life and realize that everything worked out for the best. Several years have passed since I started a new life in Wrocław. The city greeted me with its ancient architecture, special atmosphere and some kind of calmness that was unusual for me. After everything I have experienced, feeling calm is probably the most important gift a person can receive. Every morning, when I went for a walk through the streets of Wrocław, I could breathe deeply, feeling the pain, disappointment, and anger fade into the past. Here, in this city, for the first time since my betrayal, I began to feel alive again. You know, there are moments when it seems that everything is destroyed, that you are swallowed up by darkness, but then gradually life gives you back your faith in yourself. And here I was, standing on one of those same quiet streets, contemplating the old facades that had seen much more than I had, and suddenly realized that everything that had happened had made me stronger. I met new people, found true friends who never pretended to be anyone else, had no hidden agendas, and did not try to pass off betrayal as friendship. And although I was cautious at first, maybe even too cautious, these people eventually proved to me that there is still honesty in this world. And I never thought about Magdalena and Stanislav again. They became a story for me, a lesson I learned and left behind. Once I met a woman named Zofia by chance. She was the same as this city, calm, with a deep inner world, and some inexplicable sense of unity united us. We started talking, then going to coffee shops together, which I adored, and enjoying live music in local clubs. And she became my new beginning. Zofia was the opposite of everything that was left in the past. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't try to play roles. She was just there for me, and that was enough. Over time, I decided to tell her about my past. You know, some people try to hide their defeats, as if it were something to be ashamed of. But I realized that true strength is to accept your mistakes, your pain, and share it with those who deserve to know the truth. I told her everything, about Magdalena, about Stanislav, about how they betrayed me, and about how I left it all behind. And you know, her reaction was so calm and wise that I felt lighter than ever before. Jan, I've always known that strong people are not those who avoid pain, but those who experience it, she said, looking me straight in the eye. And I realized that Zofia was not just listening, she saw something in me that others did not notice. With her, I felt as if my entire past had become just a part of a bigger picture that now had a new meaning. And so, day by day, I forgot about those times when it seemed that nothing good would ever happen again. Of course, sometimes the memories still made themselves felt. There were evenings when, sitting in silence, I suddenly felt the same pain of betrayal again, but now it was a faint echo. And I was no longer afraid of it. Instead, I realized that betrayal and deception were what changed me for the better. They made me look at the world and at people differently, deeper and more attentively. And even to thank these people for the lesson they taught me, although, of course, I was not going to forgive them. A few years passed, and one day I received an unexpected message on social media. It was from Stanislav. It seems that he decided that time heals all wounds, and now, perhaps, it was time to reconnect. In the message, he wrote that he was sorry for what had happened, that his life had changed a lot, and that he had realized his mistakes. He even asked to meet, at least for coffee, to talk, like we used to. And you know, I thought for a long time about what to say. The words came by themselves as soon as I imagined our life in Krakow, the days when I trusted him and Magdalena without a doubt. And I wrote a short reply, Stanislav, thank you for everything you taught me. But there is no place for you in my life anymore. Good luck. I clicked send, and I felt a weight finally falling from my heart. It was the last thread that connected me to the past. And I knew that this was the final goodbye. That evening I shared this with Zosha, and she just smiled. She knew that it was important to me, that this small step was a big release. Together we raised our glasses to a new stage in my life. She was by my side, supporting me, and I realized that this is what true happiness is, finding someone who will not betray you, who will become your best friend and partner. And now, looking at my life, I can confidently say that I went through all this for a reason. The people who were once dearest to me have disappeared forever, but they have taught me an invaluable lesson. Now I know that only those who really deserve it are worth saving. Life after everything I've been through has become not just a new chapter for me, but a whole new book. When I met Zosha, I realized that everything that had happened before was not in vain. I have an experience that has made me stronger, more cautious, and, most importantly, able to distinguish between the real and the false. It's amazing how everything changes and you meet someone who understands you without words. Zosha didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't demand stories about the past. She knew that my life was not always easy, but she did not try to turn it into a topic for discussion or clarification. She was just there for me, and it was the greatest support I could have imagined. Our relationship with her was so easy that sometimes I didn't even believe that all this was actually happening to me. I often joked that I didn't deserve such a gift of fate after everything that had happened, but Zosha always answered simply, "Jan, you are the one who deserved it." And these words were like a balm for my soul, because they came from a person who was really sincere and frank. In Wrocław, she and I started building our own lives. I found a new job that not only brought me pleasure, but also became my true passion. Zosha worked in the field of art. She was engaged in the restoration of ancient paintings. I always joked that her work was like that of a detective. She restored pieces of the past to preserve them for the future. And it was so symbolic because she did something similar for me. We often walked around the city, and I never ceased to be amazed at how cozy and elegant this place was. The old market, which greeted us on warm evenings when we just sat in small cafes, watching people pass by, became a special place for me. Here I forgot about everything that had happened in Krakow and found my new home. From time to time, I still thought about the past, but now they were not painful memories, but something distant and even a little funny. One evening, when Zosha and I were sitting in the park watching the sunset, I decided to share my thoughts with her. "You know, Zosha, sometimes I think that everything that happened had to happen. Otherwise, would probably have remained that naive Jan who doesn't understand true values." She looked at me carefully and smiled. "Maybe you would have. But now you are the Jan who appreciates true happiness and knows what is worthy of his attention and what is not. Sometimes we have to go through the darkness to see the light, right?" Her words were simple, but they had the wisdom that cannot be found in books. They penetrated my heart and stayed there as a reminder that true happiness lies not in big events but in small moments. With her, I realized what true love and respect are, because she didn't need dramas, intrigues, or betrayals. She was just being herself, and that was enough to make me believe in people again. Time passed, and one day I decided to return to Krakow to finalize all my affairs and say goodbye to the past. My trip to this city was symbolic, because it was here that I left everything that was destroying me. And now I was returning there not as a victim, but as a new person who no longer needed excuses or explanations. I walked through the old streets where I used to spend time with Magdalena and Stanislav, but this time I felt like I was looking at this city with different eyes. It no longer had any power over me. I went to our old coffee shop, where the three of us always gathered, and for the first time in a long time I felt that it was all gone, left somewhere far in the past, which could no longer touch me. And suddenly I saw a face I hadn't expected to see. It was Magdalena. She looked haggard, and it seemed that time had not passed easily for her. She saw me and froze at first, but then, gathering her courage, she came over. I felt a part of me wanting to ask her why she did that, but I quickly stopped myself. I didn't need it anymore. Magdalena spoke softly. "Jan, I didn't expect to see you here. How are you? Have you forgiven me?" I looked at her and smiled. Magdalena, I can't say that I have. It just doesn't matter anymore. I have found a life in which you play no part. After all, you chose your own path. She was not expecting such words. It even seemed to me that she was ready to hear something completely different, maybe some drama or an emotional outburst. But I was no longer the kind of person who would start looking for someone to blame again. I simply said goodbye to her, leaving her alone with her own decisions. That day was my final farewell to the past. I left Krakow with the feeling that I no longer had anything to keep me here. Wrocław became my new home, and Zofia became my new life. And I realized that I had finally found peace. When I returned to Wrocław, I felt as if I had reached a new level. My past was behind me, and now I had only a bright future ahead of me. I was grateful for everything that happened, because now I knew that with every betrayal comes a new chance for recovery. And I chose the path that led me to happiness and found a person who became a real light for me. Zofia stayed by my side, and we built our future together, without secrets, without pain, and without deception. She became my reliable rear guard, my friend, partner, and closest person. And now, as I tell you my story, I know that the greatest revenge for all those who once betrayed me is my happiness. Now that I am finishing this story, I can safely say that I am no longer afraid of pain or loss. Because I believe that everything that happens in our lives only helps us find our own way. And if you ever face betrayal, know that it is not the end. It's just the beginning of a new path that can lead you to a place where you can truly find peace. Zofia really became the person with whom I felt like I could talk about anything. Her simplicity, sincerity, and worldly wisdom made me feel like I had finally found someone who was ready not only to listen, but to understand. Her every word, her every gesture was full of kindness and support, and now I looked at her with the certainty that I wanted to spend my life with this woman. Over time, we started living together, and I realized how important this decision had become for me. Zofia didn't try to change me, didn't interfere in my life excessively, she just became an integral part of it, a support I could rely on. And this quiet, unnoticeable stability became for me the rare luxury I had never even dreamed of. I always believed that happiness should be bright, incendiary, like fireworks, but over time I realized that true happiness is to have a person next to you who is calm and simple. A person who does not require extra words or gestures, because they know how you feel and what you need. Zofia always felt my mood and feelings, even when I couldn't find the words to share my thoughts with her. Her support was not intrusive, it was real, deep support from a person who really cares and is not looking for benefits or a basis for her own ambitions in the relationship. In her every word, every gesture, I saw only love and real affection, which I had never felt before. And you know, over time, I began to forget about the betrayal that once seemed so painful and unbearable to me. We often walked the streets of Wrocław, and I began to look at this city through the eyes of a person who had finally found his place. Wrocław, with its ancient squares, narrow alleys, and majestic rivers, became a place of a new beginning for me. Zofia and I found joy in simple things: Sunday walks in the parks, a cup of hot coffee on a cozy terrace, conversations that never ended, and silence that became comfortable and cozy for us. One evening, as we cooked dinner together in our small kitchen, I felt that this moment was exactly what I had been looking for all my life. Zofia was laughing at some joke I had just told, and I could see how easily and naturally she accepted me for who I was. No judgment, no claims, no imposed expectations. It was so simple and yet so profound. You see, I thought that after all the betrayals and disappointments, my heart would remain closed to someone else, that I would never be able to trust someone so sincerely again. But it was different with her. Zofia didn't try to take my heart by force or assurances, she just showed me that true love is not a big drama, but a quiet, calm happiness. And perhaps that was the biggest surprise for me. As time passed, our relationship with her only grew stronger. I no longer thought about Krakow, about Magdalena, about those times when everything seemed so difficult and hopeless. My past became just a lesson for me that helped me build a new foundation for the future. And now I could say with confidence that the happiness I found in Wrocław was a real gift. One day, when Zosha and I went on a short trip to a lake near the city, I decided to propose to her. We were sitting on the shore, listening to the gentle lapping of the water and watching the sun slowly disappear behind the horizon. I didn't prepare any pretentious words or buy expensive rings because I knew that Zosha was not the kind of person who appreciated external attributes. Her soul longed for simplicity, just like mine. I took her hand and simply asked her, "Zosha, do you want to be with me forever? Because I can't imagine my life without you." She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw everything I needed to know. She nodded quietly, smiled, and we hugged. It was a simple moment, but it meant more to me than any big event. I knew that I would never be alone again, and that a future awaited us, free from past mistakes and disappointments. We got married modestly, without a big celebration. Only our closest friends attended the ceremony, the ones who have always supported us and shared the most important moments of our lives with us. And although it was simple, I knew it was exactly what we both wanted. Our love did not need unnecessary decorations or lavish celebrations, it was real and pure. Our life together became something I had only ever dreamed of. We built a house, a small, cozy one, where every corner reminded us of our shared history. There was no place for the past here, we left it far behind. And although I sometimes thought about everything that happened in Krakow, these memories no longer hurt. They became just a background against which I learned to appreciate what I have now. Eventually, Zosha and I decided to get a dog. It was a wonderful retriever who became a real member of our family. He was a symbol of our new life, faithful, loving and always ready to support us in any situation. We gave him the name Vic because it was something that symbolized victory, our personal victory over all the difficulties we had experienced. A few more years passed, and I started writing a book about my life. I knew that my experiences could be useful to someone, help them find answers to the difficult questions that fate often poses to us. I did not write this book for fame or recognition. I just wanted to share my experience, my thoughts, and how to find light even in the darkest moments. And so, when I was finishing the last chapter, sitting in my office, Zosha came to me and said, "Yen, do you know that this book can help many people who, like you, have gone through difficult trials?" I looked at her and felt deeply grateful that she had always been there for me, supporting me, helping me find my way to myself. "Zosha, everything I have now is thanks to you," I said, looking at her. "You gave me a chance to start over, and I hope this book can help others find the same chance." She smiled and hugged me. And in that moment I realized that all my trials, all the betrayals and painful moments were necessary for me to find this woman, to find my home, my happiness and my own strength. We stood in silence, listening to the birds singing outside the window. And I knew that now, in my new life, would never be alone again. My life with Zosha has acquired its own special harmony. We learned to enjoy simple things, without seeking unnecessary luxuries or high-profile victories. We were united by a common understanding that true happiness is not the number of achievements or great events, but every quiet moment spent with a loved one. Zosha worked in a museum where she was engaged in the restoration of paintings. Her hands, so light and gentle, could bring ancient paintings back to life, and this has always been a source of admiration for me. Her work, seemingly modest, was a whole universe for her. She didn't just restore paintings, she brought back to life stories that had long been forgotten, and it was so symbolic for both of us. Zosha would often bring home small jars of paint, different brushes, and our house would be filled with the smells of oil and solvents. We turned one room into her workspace, where she could work on her projects and I could watch her. Her concentration and calmness were magical. She was completely immersed in her work, not paying attention to the time, and this was another confirmation of how happy I had become thanks to her. We often talked about how fate brings us together with those we need, exactly when we don't expect it. And although I was not a religious person, there was always room in my life to believe that each of us goes through certain trials that make us become better, wiser, stronger. Otherwise, we would not appreciate what we are given. Zosha was my gift for her patience and ability to not give up even when everything around her seemed to be destroyed. When our daughter was born, I felt that life had acquired new colors and meanings. We named her Anna, in memory of my mother. She was born on a cold December evening, and when I first held her in my arms, I felt that everything that had happened before now had a deep meaning. The little creature in my arms became the embodiment of all my hopes and expectations, a new page waiting to be written. Anna brought so much warmth and joy to our home that I couldn't even imagine how I could have lived without this feeling of completeness. Zofia was an amazing mother. Her care, tenderness, and ability to understand a child's needs at a glance made her the best partner for me and the best mother for our daughter. I felt incredibly grateful to have such a family. When Anna started walking, Zofia and I often went for walks in our favorite park. Anna loved to run between the trees, and I watched with a smile as she played and discovered this world filled with sounds, smells, and colors. I realized that from now on, everything I did mattered not only to me, but also to her. She became the meaning of my life, my inspiration, and my pride. Time passed, and our life in Wrocław became an everyday, but very valuable routine. I became a mature person who no longer wanted to prove anything to anyone or to myself. My happiness was here and now, with my family. Years passed, and I realized that all I had left was gratitude for everything that had happened. After all, it was thanks to the past that I found my true destiny. My book that I was working on was finally completed and published. I called it The Path to the Light, and it reflected all my experiences, my thoughts and feelings that arose along the way. I wrote it for people like me, for those who were once on the edge of despair but found the strength to start all over again. The book quickly found its readership, and I started receiving letters from people thanking me for sharing my story. It was important to me because I knew that my experience had been useful to others, and that was my greatest reward. Zofia became not just my wife, but also my muse. She supported me in everything, and together we became one. She inspired me to take on new projects, and thanks to her, I found my calling, to help people who are looking for answers to complex questions. I began to hold seminars and meetings with readers, where we discussed topics of life, betrayal, forgiveness, and strength of spirit. People wrote to me who were going through their own trials, and I shared my experience with them, trying to give them the hope that once helped me survive. With each letter, each conversation, I felt that my life had meaning, and it was nothing less than a real miracle. Anna grew up, and eventually I started sharing the stories of my life with her. I wanted her to know that life is not always easy, but there is always a way out if you believe in yourself. She looked at me with her big eyes and listened with interest, and I saw in her a reflection of the hope I had once sought in my heart. Anna became a symbol of a new beginning for me, proof that even after the darkest night, there is always a dawn. Zofia once told me that my life had become an example for others, and I realized that I had now completely completed my journey to recovery. I no longer had any bitter memories of the past because it had become a part of me, but no longer defined my present. I learned to move on and build my life from scratch. Our home has always been filled with love, support and mutual understanding. Zofia and I raised Anna together, taught her to appreciate every moment, respect others, and, most importantly, never give up. I knew that our story was not only about me, but also about everyone who had the strength to pull themselves together and find their way despite all the difficulties. Today, when I tell you my story, I want to say only one thing: every adventure in life, even the most painful, has a meaning. It teaches us to be stronger, wiser, opens up new horizons and gives us a chance to recover. I went through betrayal and disappointment, but in the end I found true happiness. And I believe that each of us can find our light if we don't stop on the way to it. Time kept moving forward. Anna grew up, and our life with Zofia was filled not only with family warmth, but also with many small moments that make life real. Everyday morning wake-ups, laughter at the family table, fun walks on weekends, all of this has become a new reality for us. We were no longer looking for happiness somewhere outside these walls, because it was here, right next to us, in every day we spent together. Anna grew up and turned into a curious, energetic girl. She was fond of drawing, just like her mother, and often spent time sketching in her room, filling our home with a creative atmosphere. I looked at her and couldn't help but feel proud of the small but confident person she was becoming. Each of her new drawings was a small discovery for us, and each time we were amazed at her talent, her ability to see the world so vividly and deeply. One day she asked me, "Dad, have you always been so happy?" I thought about it. It was not easy to tell her about what I had been through. But I knew that sooner or later the time would come when she would want to understand her roots, her heritage. And I decided not to hide the truth from her. No, Anna, not always. There were times when I thought that happiness no longer existed for me. But then I realized that happiness is something that we create on our own. Different moments can happen in life, and not all of them will be pleasant. But it's not what happens to us that matters, it's how we deal with it. Anna looked at me with her big eyes and seemed to be trying to understand these words. She was still too young to realize the full meaning, but I knew that this moment would plant a seed in her heart that would one day germinate and help her when her own time of trial came. Sometimes in the evenings I would sit in my office and look through the old notes I had taken when I first started writing my book. In every line, I could feel the pain and anger that made me get off my knees one day and start a new life. It was strange for me to look at myself, the former me, but I felt only gratitude. I had become different, wiser, stronger, and now I knew that all these experiences had become part of who I am today. From time to time, I received letters from readers thanking me for my story. Their words were not just acknowledgement for me, they were proof that everyone can find their way, even after the most difficult losses. In each letter, I saw a reflection of my own struggle, and it was another confirmation for me that I had done the right thing. Zosha always supported me in these endeavors, and together we began to organize meetings with readers. These were warm, sincere conversations about life, about losses and victories, about betrayal and forgiveness. I shared my experience, and every time I saw someone in the audience listening to me with eyes lit up, I realized that my story was changing someone's life. And that was the greatest achievement for me. Once, during a regular meeting, a middle-aged man approached me. He looked tired, but there was something in his eyes that reminded me of myself in those dark times. He said quietly, "Jan, your story helped me realize that I am not alone. You know, I too have been through betrayal and loss, and I thought I would never be able to trust again. But your words gave me strength. I realized that I could start again." These words touched me to the core. I looked at him and saw how hard it was for him to find faith in himself again, but at the same time I saw the hope he had found. I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "You can do anything. You know, it's important to remember that we build our own lives. What happened to us does not determine our future. We can let go of the past and find a new path. The main thing is not to give up." This meeting left a deep mark on my heart. I knew that my story could be a support for many people who are looking for answers to their questions. And now, when I told it again and again, it was no longer painful for me. It became part of my strength, my faith in myself and in people. Life went on, and every new day brought new moments of happiness to Zosha and Anna and me. We traveled, discovered new places, met new people. And in every country, in every city we visited, I saw how big and diverse the human soul can be. This gave me confidence that the world is full of kindness and beauty if we are open to them. When Anna grew up, she became interested in art, and Zosha and I were happy that she inherited her mother's talent. She attended art school, participated in exhibitions, and each new drawing she made us proud. Her paintings were full of bright colors and emotions, and I saw in them a reflection of her soul, full of light and joy. In the end, I realized that life is not only what we experience, but also what we leave behind. My story, my book, my happiness with Zosha, and our daughter, all of this became part of the legacy I will leave to the world. And this was the most important thing for me. Today, I am completing my story and realizing that every stage of life, every step and every obstacle is part of our path leading to the light. I went through losses, disappointments, and betrayal, but I managed to find the strength to be reborn and start again. And now I know that true happiness is the ability to be grateful for every moment, for every person who has become a part of our journey. And if you, who are listening to my story, are going through difficult times, know that there is always a light ahead waiting for you. The main thing is not to give up, believe in yourself and move forward. Because life is the greatest gift we receive, and we have to make something real out of it, something that will stay with us forever. Time flew by. Our daughter Anna turned 17, and with each passing year I saw her grow into an independent, wise, and emotionally rich girl. In her, I saw a part of myself, but also a part of what I could never become. She grew up with the inner strength and belief in herself that I may have found in myself only as an adult. And I realized that everything I had gone through had paid off. Anna, like Zosha, was my reflection, my strength, my support, and the most important gift of my life. And although she knew about my story, about betrayal and forgiveness, it was only a distant fairy tale for her, because she grew up in a happy family. Now she was the one who learned from my experience, and I was glad that she would never have a reason to go through what I had gone through. Our family became a symbol of love, respect, and support, everything I had sought and found with Zosha. One evening, when Anna and I were sitting on our terrace looking at the stars, she asked me, "Dad, have you ever regretted anything in your life?" This question took me by surprise. I had reflected many times on my past, on the mistakes I had made, on the betrayals I had gone through. But now, when Anna asked me about it, I realized that I no longer feel pain or regret. Perhaps this was the greatest gift that life has given me, the ability to accept my past and move on, without a shadow of anger or despair. You know, Anna, I don't have any regrets anymore. I used to think that the past was something that limited us, but now I realize that it is only a part of our journey. Every mistake, every loss, every betrayal makes us stronger. If I hadn't gone through all of this, I wouldn't have found my true path, I wouldn't have met your mom, and I wouldn't have been able to experience true happiness. She was listening attentively, and I could see how these words penetrated her heart. Perhaps she did not fully understand them yet, but I knew that one day, when her time of trial would come, she would remember this evening and find the strength to go through any difficulties. Later, Zosha and I started traveling more often. We visited the places we had always dreamed of, the ancient streets of Paris, the Mediterranean coast, the quiet villages of Italy, and the green hills of Ireland. In each of these places, I found inspiration that helped me realize that life is always open to new beginnings, new experiences, and new lessons. Zosha always supported my hobbies, and together we discovered a world that was so multifaceted and beautiful. Once, when we were walking through the streets of Rome together, I stopped in front of an old church. I have never been very religious, but it was here, in this ancient place, that I felt some strange peace. I realized that life is not just an alternation of happy and difficult moments. It is also about our relationships with others, our ability to forgive and move forward. And I felt that it was time to finally say goodbye to all those resentments that had once kept me in chains. When I got home, I went to my office and found an old letter I had written back when I decided to start a new life. In it, I wrote down everything I felt, everything that hurt me, and all my plans for the future. That letter became a kind of amulet for me, a symbol of my determination to live on, no matter what. And now, holding it in my hands, I decided that it was time to say goodbye to it for good. I lit a candle and, looking at the light that illuminated the room, quietly read all the lines that I had written down at the time. And with each word I felt myself freeing myself from the past, as everything that had once held me was gradually slipping away. I no longer needed that letter, because now my heart was free. After that, I sat in silence for a long time, listening only to the sound of the candle burning softly. I realized that this was not just the end, but a new beginning that would be filled with light and peace. I realized that life had taught me the most important lesson, to appreciate every moment, every person who is close to me, and not to waste a single minute on resentment or painful memories. Now that I'm coming to the end of my story, I feel that my life has achieved harmony. My family is what I live for, and every time I see a smile on Zosha's or Anna's face, I know that I have not gone through my journey in vain. My mistakes have become my teachers, and now I can look to the future without fear or regret. Each of us goes through our own trials, and each of us has the power to overcome them. My story is not just a story about betrayal or forgiveness, it is a story about how to find yourself, even if it seems that everything is lost. Now that I am facing a new stage in my life, I know that I will never be alone, because I have those I love by my side, and there is no room in my heart for pain or resentment. And if my story can help someone find their way, then I will be happy that I was able to make this world a little bit better. We all have the ability to let go of the past, and it is this ability that makes us free. And no matter how difficult it may be sometimes, we can always find the strength to forgive, let go, and start from scratch. Now I can confidently say that life is the greatest gift, and every moment of it is another opportunity to make yourself better, stronger and happier.